Hi everyone, this is Celine from Blue Cala Patterns and welcome to video 2 for the Lunaria Satchel. There's a lot of exterior assembly to do for this bag. The lining is actually fairly simple and straightforward to assemble. So what I'm going to do is separate the exterior assembly into a lot of smaller videos. That way there, if you don't have a lot of time to sew as well, you can just do one of the videos and it's not going to be, hours long. So what we're going to start with, we're going to follow the pattern and we're going to start by assembling our exterior gusset. So you'll need your two exterior bottom pieces, your two exterior side panel pieces, your side connector bands and your side connector pieces, both of your 1.5 inch rectangle rings. And if you're installing purse feet, you're going to need your purse feet, and you're going to need the bottom firm interfacing and the gusset foam interfacing. So to start, we will take both of our exterior bottom pieces and place them right sides together. And then we're going to sew them together along one of these shorter sides. Just going to use 2 clips to hold them in place. So you're going to sew them together here with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so they're now sewn together and you should have a piece that looks like this. If you're using fabric, you're going to press the seam allowance open and you're going to top stitch along both sides of the seam. If you're using vinyl or cork or something that can't be pressed, like what I've done, you're going to have to finger press open and then top stitch on both sides of the seam. Okay, so not sure if you can see this, but I've top stitched the seam allowance along both sides of the seam. Now you're going to take your piece of bottom firm interfacing and mark the center. So you know that it's 8 inches wide, so I want you to make a mark at 4 inches from either of the shorter sides at the top and the bottom. That way there, when we glue it to the bottom piece, we know it's going to be perfectly centered. So I'm just using some Fabri-Tac glue to glue this interfacing to the wrong side of my bottom. Okay. Now I make sure that those center marks are lined up with that middle seam, and I should have about 1/2 inch of space along the top and the bottom edges here. If you like to be really precise, use a ruler and make sure that you have exactly 1/2 inch of space. So I'm going to put something heavy on this and let it dry. These are just paperweights. And let these dry. Now, if you want to install purse feet, this is the step where you're going to want to install those. So I'm going to pause the video, let this dry, and then we're going to install the purse feet. Okay, so if you've decided to install purse feet, you're going to want to start by marking the location of your purse feet. So I'm going to use my big clear ruler to do this. What you want to do is make a mark. So going from the center here, you're going to go 3 inches over and 1.25 inches from the top edge. So 3 inches from the center and then 1.25 inches from the top edge. And that will be the location of one of your purse feet. Now you're going to do the same here on this side. And 1.25 inches. And there's the mark for another piece. And then we're doing the same thing on this side. I'm going to move my foam interfacing. Okay. And okay, so now we have our 4 marks. You're going to need to use a hole punch and punch out these holes. Okay, and then we insert the prongs of our purse feet in through the right side of the bottom piece. So, turn it over. And then we spread the prongs and place our washer and then spread the prongs to secure. So I'm going to do that for the remaining 3 purse feet, and then we'll continue assembling the gusset. So the 4 purse feet are installed. Now you're going to need to take your side panel exterior pieces. Now if you're using a directional print, you'll need to pay attention because you want the direction of the print to go this way. I'm not using a directional print, so it doesn't matter. So we're going to sew one of them along this shorter end of the bottom. And then the second one we're going to attach this side. So I'll go over to my machine and I'll sew these on with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so we have our side panel sewn on. If you're using fabric, you'll want to press the seam allowance towards the bottom and then top stitch the seam allowance in place. If, like me, you're using a material that can't be pressed, like vinyl or cork, then you're just going to have to finger press. So I usually press down like this and kind of pull slightly on the side panel just to make sure that the seam is nice and flat. And then top stitch here, and then do the same on this side, top stitch here. So you're top stitching on the part where you folded in the seam allowance along the side of the bottom piece here. Okay, so it's all of the gusset is assembled, and I don't know if you can see the top stitching here. So now we're going to attach this to our foam interfacing piece that we set aside. And you're just going to clip it or pin it to the wrong side. Now, if you're worried about bulk in the seams, you're going to baste this in place with a zigzag stitch. My machine is really good with layers, so I'm not going to use a zigzag stitch. I'm just going to use a basting straight stitch. Okay, so I'm going to go baste this in place, and then we will sew up our side connectors and side connector bands. Okay, so this the foam interfacing has been basted to the assembled gusset with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm just going to put this here for now. Now you will need your side connector pieces. Okay, and what you will want, so these are 3 inches wide, 2 3/4 high, and what you want to do first is draw a line down the center. Let me see if I can find my white pencil so that we can actually see the marks on the black. Actually, I'll use my clear ruler. And we just want to draw a line down the center on the wrong side. I don't know, you probably can't see this in the video, but there's a line there down the center. Now, if you're using fabric, you'll want to press, so you'll fold the edges in towards that center line and press this in place. And then you should have a strap piece that is 1.5 inches wide by 2 3/4 inches high. If you're using cork or vinyl like I am, you're actually just going to go over to your machine and you're going to sew along one side with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the outer edge. So you're going to do this all along this side and then rotate, start sewing across and fold this in towards the center, fold across and then rotate and then sew along this other edge with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And make sure that you backstitch when you start and end sewing. And do the same for the second piece. So the side connector pieces are done, and you'll see on the wrong side there's the raw edge in the middle. So now you're going to slip one connector through one of the rectangle rings. I'm just going to use a clip, so you want those raw edges at the ends to meet. Do the same for the second. And then you're just going to go over to your machine and you'll just baste the ends together so that they stay together. Okay, so both of our ring connectors are ready. I've just basted the bottom edges so that they stay together. Now I'm going to take the side connector bands and I'm going to once again draw a line down the center. You probably can't see those lines, but they're there. Okay, and then we're going to use, you'll need some clips and some fabric glue. I use fabric glue because I'm going to be sewing through this part, and I don't want to use double-sided tape and it sort of gums up my needle while I'm sewing, because then it will ruin your stitching. Okay, so I just put a strip of glue along that center line and then I fold this in half and I use clips to hold it in place. Now I try not to keep my clips there for too long, otherwise they leave marks that take forever to disappear. Okay, just fold in towards that center line, wrong sides together. Go. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same for this one, and then I'm going to wait until the glue dries before I continue with the next step. Okay, so not sure if my glue is dried, but I'm going to continue anyways. What I've done now is I've marked the center here at the bottom of these side connector straps. So it should be, because they're 1.5 inches wide, it's going to be 3/4 of an inch from either of these sides. And then I also need to mark the center of my side connector bands. Let's see if my glue dried enough here. I was trying to avoid my clips leaving any marks. Okay, so these are 1 inch by 4 3/4 inches, so we want it to be 2 3/8 of an inch. So I'm not exactly at 4 3/4. So 2 3/8. So I'm just marking the center here and here on the wrong side, okay? Not on the right side, mark it on the wrong side. And then here we are going to use a tiny bit of tape. I don't want you to use it anywhere near the edges. You should only use it in the centermost part. And actually we would just really need 1.5 inches wide so that you can stick your connector to. So make sure that this center mark is lined up with this center mark and glue it in place. Leave about 1/8 of an inch from the bottom. I just don't want this raw edge of this strap piece to stick out the bottom of the connector. And I'm also just going to put a clip here so that it stays in place. And I'm going to set it aside, and I'm going to do the same for this second piece and this second side connector strap. So now we're going to attach these pieces to our side panel, exterior side panel pieces. So we want the top edge here of our side connector band to be 1.5 inches from this top narrower edge. I'm going to actually use the grid on my cutting mat to help me figure out the placement. So I just want that top edge to be 1.5 inches. And I'm just going to use a clip here and here to hold it in place. You also have that double-sided tape that's kind of holding it in place. I'm going to take this out. So now we're going to go over to the machine, and you're going to sew along the bottom edge, and you're also going to sew here along the top edge with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from these longer edges. And then we need to reinforce this because one line of stitching is not enough. So you have two options. Either you can use rivets, or you can sew again through the center. You could do it twice or just the one time down the center. If you decide to sew twice, maybe sew 3/8 of an inch from this edge, 3/8 of an inch from that edge. I'll just, I'll leave that up to you, up to personal preference. For me, I like to use rivets, so I'm going to sew along the top and the bottom, and then I'm going to use some rivets to reinforce it. Okay, so I have the side connectors installed. I sewed along the top and the bottom edges, and I decided to use 2 rivets to give them some extra, some reinforcement to make them extra strong. And we're going to stop the video here. In the next video, we're going to assemble the front main body panel of our bag, which includes those 2 exterior zipper pockets and the front slip pocket.